So we're going to begin by looking briefly at some of the material that we looked at last time. And so I presume you're seeing that now, yes?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, good. So actually I can slide you guys now. Okay, so one of the things I want to point out is I have a website, and there's a selection on the website. And if you go to lectures and classes, you can get copies of all of the slides, and in a separate little file, copies of the text. And I'm not going to really go over much of what we talked about last time, but I want to highlight some of the interesting stories. So the first story is Lot and his daughters. Lot is Abraham's cousin, famously living in Sodom. I guess he's living in Sodom. God decides to destroy the cities. Lot escapes with his daughters. His wife famously turns into a pillar of salt. And his daughters believe that they are the only ones, that the three of them are the only people left on earth. So they decide to get their father drunk and have sex with him and produce 2 children. And the 2 children are Moab and Amnon. Moab actually means from daddy, a wonderful name to give to your child of incest, parental incest, just in case anybody's wondering where little Moab came from. And Amnon is another one. And one of the interesting things about them is in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, never admit an Ammonite or a Moabite into the congregation of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation. You shall never concern yourself with their welfare or benefit as long as you live. So these so these 2 have 2 strikes against them. Number one, they are the product of incest, father-daughter incest. And number 2, the book of Deuteronomy specifically says, don't worry yourself with them. The next story is Judah and Tamar. And again, without telling the complete story, Judah has 3 sons. The oldest one marries Tamar, he drops dead. The next son marries Tamar. He doesn't want to produce children with her because the child would not be considered his descendant. So he spills his seed on the ground and he drops dead. Judah doesn't want to give his 3rd son to Tamar. So he basically tells her to go home and don't bother us anymore. According to Jewish law, he actually has to give her to his 3rd son. So she plays a trick on him. She dresses up as a prostitute and seduces him. Well, I don't know if seduces him and conducts a transaction. She gets pregnant. He hears about it, says, bring her out, let her be burned alive. And then she basically produces the proof that it was, in fact, him as the father. And he said, she is more right than I, and since I didn't give her to my son. So now we have, I'm sorry, let me get further into the story. So last time we read the whole story. So now we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, another forbidden union. So all these guys would be mamzers because incest. This is a forbidden union, so their children would be incest, and their child is named Perez. Then we actually read the entire book of Ruth. Ruth is a Moabitess from Moab, and it's repeated over and over again. Basically, a beautiful little story of Boaz who shows her kindness, and finally she has a baby, and so we have Ruth, who is a Moabitess, is married to Boaz, who they then give birth to Obed, who gives birth to Jesse, who gives birth to David. And we're now at the story of David and Bathsheba. Okay, so let me I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment so I can actually see who's here. Okay, so it's basically, we have Travis who has entered. Travis, can you hear me? Okay, you are muted. You can unmute yourself if you want to chime in.
Hello.
Hello. So anybody have any questions or comments or issues or?
Well, the only thing that was interesting is how they got around the prohibition in Deuteronomy about Ammonites and Moabites.
Yes. So there's going to be a lot of, you may not all know Larry. Larry is a lawyer and now a member of the grand jury, so watch it. You'll be surprised to learn they use a legal hair splitting. So actually nowhere in the Bible do they even seem to concern themselves with this. But the rabbis of the Talmud are going to have a big problem justifying it, because the rabbis of the Talmud, I mean, David is the is our guy, David, Melech Israel, and all that. Did I start recording?
Yes.
Yes, it says recording.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So somehow they got to get David to be kosher. So far we have a problem because David is descendant of Moabites. And Beth either knew or guessed last time. The way they're going to get it out, the way they're going to solve the problem is the Hebrew text says Moabite, and the Ruth is a woman, so she's a Moabitess, not a Moabite. So everybody, say, phew, utter a sigh of relief. And David so far is kosher. But wait, there's more. So David's going to get in trouble in the text we're about to read. Any other issues or questions? Okay, let us go to our text. And I think I can do slideshow from the current slide. Okay, we all see David, we all see just the slide, David and Bathsheba?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so some fun pictures here. One is, we'll see very early in the story, King David at his a palace with a view, and you see what the view is. He's going to see Bathsheba taking a bath on the roof. This is Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, coming to David, reporting in from the field, and then Uriah being sent to the front and getting killed, and Nathan accusing King David of committing a sin. That's just the graphic. I should probably distribute these pictures more in the text. Okay, so we are now reading, and I actually have in another slide, if people are really dying to see some Hebrew text, or if there are questions about Hebrew, I have the text open to me in a book, and I can also pull it up on the screen. So we're in the book of Samuel. Samuel is prophet, and this is 2 Samuel. The reason you have a 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel is it was a very long scroll, and so it was one scroll, simply the book of Samuel, but when they put it into book form, they split it into two sections. So our custom in Torah study, and here also, is to have someone who would like to read. Go ahead and read.
At the turn of the year, the season when the kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him, and they devastated Ammon and besieged Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem.
Okay, let's stop for a second. This is very subtly written, and there are some very interesting, I believe, subtle criticisms of King David. I'm trying to see you guys better, but I can't. So this is now the time for battle. It's kind of interesting. I guess it's spring. Turn of the year is, I don't think they mean Rosh Hashanah here. Let's see if my commentary spells it out. Yeah, they think it's this commentary at least says it's Nisan in the spring. So it's time when kings go out to battle. And sure enough, the Israelites are going out and battling. Amnon, you remember Amnon. So where is King David during this battle?
On his throne.
Home in Jerusalem. And typically kings would go out to battle. In fact, in other parts of the book of Samuel, not only does David go into battle, but he would bring the Holy Ark with him into battle. The Holy Ark with the tablets of the covenant in it was seen almost as a talisman, a lucky charm, if you will, that would protect the Israelites. And actually, at one point in time, it gets captured, I think, by the Egyptians, maybe the Philistines. I can't quite remember. So this is a subtle dig at David. One of the really interesting things going on is this story does not treat David very favorably. And probably it's the single credible reason why we think the story probably has historical value, because if it was simply written to be, the kind of history that a king would like, it would not say all these terrible things about him, which we're going to see. And so it begins with a not so subtle dig. The people are out fighting. David, who I think had bone spurs, I think that's in one of the commentaries. David, a poor guy, needed to remain in Jerusalem. Okay, Larry, pick it up on verse 2.
That's a reference.
Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the royal palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and the king sent someone to make inquiries about the woman. He reported, "She is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite." David sent messengers to fetch her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. She had just purified herself with her period, and she went back home.
I think David actually used Tic Tacs to freshen his breath just before this.
The woman conceived, and she sent word to David, "I am pregnant." Thereupon David sent a messenger to Joab, "Send Uriah the Hittite to me," and Joab sent Uriah to David.
Okay, let's read this carefully. So David sees Bathsheba. Does he know that she is married?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone know about this assignation other than David? Were they doing it sneakily and on the sly?
It sounds like they do.
Sorry?
It sounds
No, it sounds like everybody.
Sounds like,
So-
messengers would know, but
David sends messengers. Do you think the word gets out when David sends messengers?
Sure.
Yes. Do we know whose baby the baby is?
no.
Yeah, pretty good bet.
I submit that we know with certainty.
Because
She'd just been to the mikveh.
That's right.
Exactly. She had just purified herself after her period. Uriah's out fighting.
You're assuming something here.
Yes.
Hold on. You're assuming something here. You're assuming he only had sex with her once.
I don't care how many times he had sex with her. Her
Well-
husband, hold on. Her husband's out fighting. Actually, you may not know that yet. Yeah, you may not know that. You'll see that in the next, in the later story.
well,
Her husband's out in the field.
you actually do know it because David sends a message to Joab, who said, "Send Uriah the Hittite
Oh,
to
okay.
me."
Yes, I'm sorry.
He's
Yes.
out in Moab with the
Yes.
battle.
Yes. So Uriah, the husband, is out in the field fighting. Bathsheba just had her period. She went to the mikveh. She purified herself. And they had sex and she conceived.
But it's not written to lay a lot of guilt on David in the sense that he called for her and she lay with him. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, it doesn't. Well,
resistance.
there's some scholarly articles written on the subject of what did Uriah know and when did he know it? Because that's going to actually become an interesting question here.
Yeah, but she was willing and she,
Yeah. So we don't know. And then the other question is, if if you're a woman in just in Jerusalem and the king sends for you, do you have the right to refuse him? I mean, it's just unclear. But I would submit to you, there is no question whose baby this is. Are we in agreement on that?
Okay.
You've convinced me.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So somebody else want to pick up on verse 7?
When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab and the troops were faring and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and bathe your feet."
Okay, let's stop for a second. We talked last time about this phrase of feet being sexually suggestive and uncovering, and that was actually in the story of Ruth. We saw that. So Job comes in from the field, goes to David, report in, how's the war going? Terrific. Go home and bathe your feet. Why do you think David is sending Uriah home to bathe his feet?
So he could be with Bathsheba,
And why would David want him to do that?
obviously.
To lay with Bathsheba.
Right?
And why?
So that,
So
child
that-
can't be- the child, he can argue the child's not his. If it
Yeah,
happened
so
that she got pregnant.
yeah, so I think at least it's pretty clear to me that David's strategy here is if Uriah goes home, lies with Bathsheba, it's pretty early in the term of the pregnancy, although that's an interesting question, but
Yes.
everyone, including Uriah, will think that the baby is Uriah's, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's see what Uriah does right after bathe your feet.
When Uriah left the royal palace, a present from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the royal palace along with the other officers of his lord and did not go down to his house. When David was told that Uriah had not gone down to his house, he said to Uriah, "You just came from a journey. Why didn't you go down to your house?" Uriah answered David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are located at Succoth, and my master Joab and your majesty's men are camped in the open. How can I go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As you live, by your very life, I will not do this."
Okay, let's stop for a second. So again, not so subtle a dig here. Uriah is saying, actually, the ark, not only are the troops, but the ark is camped out in the field. And he swears, but he doesn't swear to God. He swears on David's life, which, it'd be fun to kind of look at commentaries on that. So he's saying, with my guys out in the field, am I to have pleasure lying with my wife? Is that something that I should do? Hint, hint. So let's see what David's reaction is, verse 12.
David said to Uriah, "Stay here today also, and tomorrow I will send you off." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. The next day, David summoned him, and he ate and drank with him until he got him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep in the same place with his lord's officers. He did not go down to his home.
So David tries a second time, gets him drunk. It may have worked with Lot and his daughters, but it doesn't seem to work with Uriah. Whoops, okay. I'm just gonna zoom this out so I can see it a little better. Okay, so somebody else want to pick up on the next morning?
You need to roll down because we can't see below that.
What?
Yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab and the troops were faring. And no, that's we
No,
haven't.
Read this
Yeah.
already.
This is
when Uriah came to him?
Yes.
yeah. We read
No, we
that.
read this already.
read
We
that.
read this.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
There you go.
That morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, which he sent with Uriah. He wrote in the letter as follows: "Place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be killed." So when Joab was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at the point where he knew there were able warriors. The men of the city sallied out and attacked Joab, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. Uriah the Hittite was among those who died.
Okay, so I think this is particularly disappointing of beloved King David. Not only is he sending Uriah with instructions to be killed, but he himself is carrying the letter to Joab. Everybody with us on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So now Joab has to report back to David. And Joab knows what's going on because he got the letter.
Joab sent a full report of the battle to David. He instructed the messenger as follows. When you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, the king may get angry and say to you, why did you come so close to the city to attack it? Didn't you know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Amibelach, son of Jerubbesheth? Was it not a woman who dropped an upper millstone on him from the wall at Tebez, from which he died? Why did you come so close to the wall? Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite was amongst those who was killed.
Okay, so this is a little confusing. Joab is giving instructions to take back with a messenger to David. And he says to the messenger, the king may get angry with you and talk about another battle where people got too close to the wall and this person dropped a millstone on some of the soldiers. Job says, don't worry about that. David might get angry, but tell him that Uriah was among those who were killed, and that will calm down David. Okay, the messenger.
Messenger set out. He came and told David all that Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, first the men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Then we drove them back up to the entrance of the gate. But the archers shot at your men from the wall, and some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah and Hittite also fell. Whereupon David said to the messenger, give Joab this message. Do not be distressed about the matter. The sword always takes its toll. Press your attack on the city and destroy it. Encourage him.
So David hears that Uriah is dead, sends back the message to Joab, what can you do? You know, those who live by the sword, fall by the sword, you know, keep fighting, good job. Okay, let's finish this page.
When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. Lamented over her husband. After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife, and she bore him a son.
Okay. One of the interesting things which we'll also see is notice that it doesn't even call her by name. It doesn't say when Bathsheba heard. It says Uriah's wife. That's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So her husband dies. There's a 30-day period of mourning, and David brings her to the palace. She marries David, and she bears him a son.
Rabbi,
Yes.
in those days, well, we're talking about David. Didn't David have other wives?
Yes. I don't know. Well, I don't specifically remember if he had other wives at this point. I think he did have other wives, but I don't remember the specifics.
Wasn't he married to Michal?
Michal. Yeah, Michal, who was Saul's daughter. Yeah, so he's had other wives, and I think he remained married to Michal. So the answer is yes, David had other wives.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody want to pick up at chapter 12.
But the Lord was displeased with what David had done, and the Lord sent Nathan and David. He came to him and said, there were two men in the same city, one rich and one poor. The rich man had very large flocks of it and herds, but the poor man had only one little ewe lamb, and he had bought. He tended it, and it grew up together with him and his children. It used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup, and nestle to his bosom. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler came to a rich man, but he was loath to take anything from his own flock or herds to prepare a meal for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. And I don't understand what this is all about.
Okay, so Nathan God is displeased with David, right?
Got it.
So Nathan, who is a prophet, is going to come to David and say, let me tell you a story. And the story is, you have a rich man that has lots of flocks and herds. A poor man has only one baby little lamb. And, you know, he would sleep with him, and it was his pet. One day, a traveler comes to visit the rich man. The rich man doesn't want to give him, you know, lamb stew from any of his own flocks. So he takes it from the poor man to serve him. Nathan is telling this story to David, and we'll see what David's reaction is.
David flew into a rage against the man and said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He shall pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and showed no pity.
And one of the Torah consequences of theft is to compensate by a factor of 4.
And Nathan said to David, that man is you.
Ata ha'ish, very famous in the biblical world.
Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel. It was I who anointed you king over Israel, and it was I who rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and possession of your master's wives, and I give you the house of Israel and Judah. And if you were not enough,
Oh, okay.
That's me. Sorry.
I would give you twice as much more. Why then have you flaunted the command of the Lord and done what displeases him? You have put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife and made her your wife and had him killed by the sword of the Ammonites. Therefore, the sword shall never depart.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife. Thus said the Lord, I will make the calamity rise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes, and he shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. You acted in secret, but I will make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight.
Okay, so that's the point of Nathan's parable. Basically saying, you are the rich man who took this other man's wife, even though you're king of Israel, you could have anybody you want, but he takes the other man's wife and has him killed. And by the way, this is, you know, chapter 11 in 2 Samuel. Up until this point, David's star has been rising. And David is doing very well. I mean, he becomes king. He, you know, the story of Goliath, he kills Goliath. He is, you know, the boy wonder. He is a singer. He charms Israel. Saul goes crazy against him, but he still succeeds Saul. And he marries Saul's daughter, and his star is doing really well. So, Michael, I got to keep muting you. He's doing really, really well. And at this point in time, David's star starts sinking, and it goes to hell in a handbasket.
I have a question.
Yes.
It sounds as if the language that says, quote, thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, that quote that follows, it sounds as if it's coming from the Lord.
Yes, you see there's a little open quote mark there.
Not from the mouth of Nathan.
Sorry?
It seems as if those words are coming from the mouth of the Lord rather than the mouth of Nathan.
Yes, so that's the role of a prophet. The role of the prophet is to quote God.
Okay, so we are to assume then that these words are coming out of Nathan's mouth.
Yes, so yeah, Natan said to David, that man is you, Kolamar Adonai, the God of Israel, and then open quote. Now in the text, there's no quotes, obviously in the Hebrew text, but clearly he is quoting God now. And even down here, verse 11, you again have thus saith the Lord.
Okay.
And things are not going to go well with you.
How
Now
does that?
Go ahead, Jill.
How does that man is you? How is that used? today? I mean, you say it's a very.
Oh, it's just for me, it's a very famous quote because even in my very early Hebrew, I could understand it. It's just ata ha'ish. It's 2 words.
Uh-huh.
You are the man.
But is it used like?
No, I don't know. If I gave
Okay.
that impression, I didn't mean to.
Okay.
I just.
It was a Michael knowing Hebrew.
Yes. Okay. So now the big question is, how will David respond to being criticized? Think of leaders you know. And wonder how they might respond to a mere prophet.
Fire everyone around you that has
Right.
said anything against what you said.
Let's see. And somebody else want to pick up.
Can you hear me? It's Michael.
Yes.
Okay, I'm hooked up twice. That's why you got me muted once. David said to Nathan, I stand guilty before the Lord. And Nathan replied to David, the Lord has remitted your sin. You shall not die. However, since you have spurned the enemies of the Lord by this deed, even the child about to be born to you shall die.
Which is pretty harsh. But the interesting thing about David is he admits his guilt in the same way that Judah admits his guilt, and Judah also does that in the story of Joseph. So that becomes one of the ways the rabbis give merit to these characters, that when they're guilty of sin, and aren't we all, that they admit their guilt. So let's continue at verse 15. Erwin?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Actually, too. If God knows, even though David has obviously he knew that what is right or what is wrong, but God, I think, could have prevented this calamity, what David did, because, as you said, the star of Israel was rising, and God wanted to create an incredible land. That's why we received it. No, and so why didn't he stop David to commit the sin? And number 2, after David committed the sin, why did God punish an innocent child?
Okay. So the answer to the first question is free will. And this is, a continuing issue. Erwin, you and I discussed this endlessly. That I would say one of the major tenets in Judaism and in the understanding of God is that God gives people the freedom to make choices. God tells us what we're supposed to do. David clearly knows right from wrong. In the parable that Nathan gives him, David knows that, what the rich man does is wrong. And presumably David understood what he was doing, adultery and murder. He pretty much understood that that was wrong. In fact, he tried to cover it up by sending Nathan home to his wife. And when Nathan doesn't go home to his wife, he has him killed. So David clearly knows what he's done is wrong. But I would say one of the things we have to live with is that God gives us the freedom to do good and to do evil.
Yeah, but why didn't Nathan tell David before, when he asked Bathsheba to come to his house, and then when he asked the other guy to kill Bathsheba's wife?
So do you envision Nathan going to David, showing up while David is got his binoculars trained on Bathsheba over there, and saying, and Nathan is saying, no.
Yeah.
Is that what you have in mind?
Yes.
He's the king.
But also my biggest concern is, why didn't God punish David? Why did he?
God does punish David.
What?
David's life goes to hell at this point in time.
Yes, but
his children try and kill him. One of his children, I think, takes his concubine and has sex with her out in the open.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
David's life is a mess after this.
Yes, but God takes an innocent life.
Well, they can be argued in Judaism that till the child is born, that he is not a person. It is not a
Oh,
life.
that's a very interesting.
And that's, I
comment,
think, the
Larry.
basis of why you can have abortion.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting point.
But the child was already born.
No,
It's
no.
not-
No. Well, when Nathan is speaking,
It says about
no,
to-
hang on. I think you're right.
The child, it says the
about
next
to be
line
born.
says,
but
Yeah,
then it says
right
the
back
child,
here. Yeah, right back at the end of this.
yeah, the
Yeah,
child.
the child is born. Yes.
Yes.
So
now, but now it
But
says
the
that the child about to be born.
Right.
No.
okay, that's a good point. Let's just take a quick look at the Hebrew.
This,
But the next line
Suppose
says,
the
and the
child
Lord
would be born,
afflicted
no
the
one's gonna-
child.
right.
Yeah.
You're
So
right,
so
but
yeah.
born-
It's yeah. It's a little bit unclear. I actually want to take a quick look at the Hebrew.
Just look at the next portion.
Yeah, the next
talks
portion
about the
says
child.
that,
Well, the next portion.
Yeah, it's clear that the child gets born.
and then he becomes critically ill. The next line is that
Yes.
he
7 days later.
So God
But
punishes
then-
the child.
But he was afflicted, apparently.
Yeah. So I would say the verb tense, there's only two verb tenses in biblical Hebrew. Past tense, which is for completed actions, and I think it's called imperfect, which is for actions either in the present or the future. And I think that's in the imperfect tense. So I agree that there's an issue here. It seems like Nathan is talking to him before the child is born, but clearly the child is already born.
Yes.
I think it's clear.
Yes.
Yes. Because at the end of here, she bears him a son at the end of chapter 11, and then in chapter 12, Nathan shows up. So I guess you could argue that when Nathan shows up, the child had not yet been born, but it really doesn't answer Erwin's question, and that is, should the child be punished for the sins of the parents?
Yeah.
And the only thing I would point out, I would say no. The only thing I would point out, though, in the case of a mamzer, and we talked about this last time, a mamzer is the child born of a forbidden union. And clearly this child is that. And the mamzer has a stain attached to his lineage and can only marry another mamzer, can't marry another kosher Jew. So it's not death, but it's similar. And, I would say actions have consequences. And so the child is tainted and is going to die.
That child is never named. There's no name for that child, right?
I don't think so. No, I think
Okay.
that's right. That's interesting. Okay, so let's continue reading, and we'll see what happens to the child. Yeah, Nathan went home, and we can't get God off the hook because the Lord afflicted the child.
Nathan went home, and the Lord afflicted the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and it became critically ill.
You notice again how they're emphasizing this is Uriah's wife,
Yes.
even though Uriah is now dead, and it's actually David's wife.
David entreated God for the boy. David fasted, and he went in and spent the night lying on the ground. The senior servants of his household tried to induce him to get up from the ground, but he refused, nor would he partake food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell David that the child was dead, for they said, "We spoke to him when the child was alive, and he wouldn't listen to us. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He might do something terrible." When David saw his servants talking in whispers, David understood that the child was dead. David asked his servant, "Is the child dead?" "Yes," they replied.
Okay.
So-
So,
This comes from, a terrible psychological burden that if your child gets ill, it's because you have sinned.
I would
And
say yes.
it's
So-
enormous to think, and this is, Kushner writes a whole book that bad things happen to good people.
Mhm.
It is not that you have sinned. And this is certainly for the Orthodox or the conservative, this would be a horrible thing to believe, to actually believe that because you have somehow sinned in your life, your child is ill.
Okay, so this opens up also another major issue, and we're going to discuss this next Monday night at Torah study, men's Torah study, but women are invited. The issue is, does God control everything or not, really? And
You're
I
going to
would,
solve that on Torah study?
I am going to explore it, but briefly, let me ask you this. We'll discuss it a little bit. There's actually not a tremendous amount of text. You've very beautifully stated the problem with assuming that God controls everything. If God controls everything, something tragic happens, and you assume that God did it, and so that can be enormously painful.
Rabbi,
Yeah, I'm going to just ask a question, and then you can comment. What would you say is the benefit of assuming that God controls everything?
Then the burden isn't yours.
Well, no, he
Yeah.
sinned, so God took the baby.
if God controls everything,
Yes.
And
what good is free will?
Well, you
In
still
other
have
words-
free will. Hold on a second. I will answer the question. You have free will to sin or not sin,
Yes.
but if you sin, then God may take your baby's life. You may get coronavirus.
but
Your
if-
car
if
may
you-
slam into a wall.
if you are about to sin and God does not like that, wouldn't he stop you?
Well,
Free
then
will.
you take away free will.
Yeah.
So I'm saying this is a combination of free will and God controlling what happens.
Michael, where
Yes.
where does
Oh.
fate or
I'm
does
sorry?
fate come in to this
Where-
picture at all?
Where does
The
what?
concept of fate, F-A-T-E.
Okay, so fate, I would say, is a statement that really everything is going according to God's plan, and you really can't change that.
Yeah.
So, and when I was talking with some of my relatives, and particularly younger relatives, in the wake actually of a death, and they were talking about coronavirus, a lot of the reaction of these kids in their 20s and 30s is, if I'm going to get coronavirus, I'm going to get coronavirus. It's sort of fate. And I don't believe that for a minute. But so that's also part of this. This is actually a deep discussion, which we're going to begin to explore on Monday night. But Erwin, go ahead.
Kabbalistically speaking, our life is predestined.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So, so then why does God stand by and let us sin?
Okay, so I would agree with you that in Kabbalah, everything is going the way God intends it to go. So why does God allow terrible things to happen to innocent people?
The terrible thing is a different. Why does God let us sin?
The answer to that is God knows.
Yes.
And the answer is free will. So you have to somehow combine free will. So what the Kabbalists would say, because I've asked Kabbalists this question, they would say that free will is an illusion. We think we have free will, but God knows what our free will choice will be. I think I discussed this, I don't remember when I discussed it. The other day, God knows what's going to happen because God has seen the end of the movie. Inside the movie, somebody is going toward a door. Don't open the door. There's a guy with a chainsaw behind it. And we're telling the sweet young thing, don't open the door, don't open the door, don't open the door. But anybody who's seen the movie knows she's going to open the door. So inside the movie, she thinks she has free will, but because the movie is printed and on film, we know she has no free will. So if God knows the future perfectly, then free will is an illusion.
Oh,
Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
if I go back to the text,
Yes.
to the beginning of the text, David is sitting up on his
Balcony.
villa, okay, on the balcony. Why didn't Bathsheba take the bath at home? Why did she have to go on the roof to entice David?
What makes you think she wasn't at home? I don't know what the practice
No,
was.
she was on the room in the front of the palace.
She was
on
on
the
the roof of her home.
The roof of her house.
It was a lovely day.
A lovely day. I
So
understand.
anyway, one answer is, if she did that, we wouldn't have a story.
right.
Oh, okay.
So the real question is, why in
It's
the
always
world?
the woman's fault.
Exactly. Well, I assume that
Very
went without.
not me too. Very not me too.
Actually, Bathsheba doesn't get punished.
No.
Yeah.
David gets punished. The baby gets punished. It's an interesting
Yeah,
point.
he has
Um,
the baby. That's a horrible thing.
It is a horrible thing. So, so the question that we should ask, and I will ask when all these stories are ended, I mean, we have Lot with his daughter, we have Judah and Tamar, we have Ruth and Boaz, this Moabite, and now we have David and Bathsheba. Why is it in our sacred story, whether you believe the Bible is true or not, and I actually believe this story has a good chance of being true, which is to say historical, because it's such a bizarre story, no one would ever make it up. I have a book. I have
It's
a book.
been happening time and before.
I have a book on my bookshelf.
A powerful guy sees a pretty girl, uses her, has a baby. Please.
Yes, but it's not usually Uriah's daughter. It's usually Monica something, but I can't.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So, so the interesting question, which we're going to get to, is why is this in our Bible so prominently? So be thinking about that. But I have a great book on my bookshelf, which is fictional, which is the story of how this story gets written. And as we'll see, David and Bathsheba are going to give birth to Solomon. And so there's going to be a legal issue with Solomon. Now, Solomon knows his father was a philanderer, a murderer, an adulterer, and so on. So he gives a scribe the job to spin the story, namely write the story for the Bible, but try and get David off the hook as much as possible. The problem is everybody knows the story. So he can't, there's another account of this in the book of Chronicles, which is a much drier fiction. It's the last book in the Hebrew Bible, and it doesn't mention any of this stuff. But the scribe has to somehow write the story, and this is what he comes up with, and Solomon puts him to death. Okay, so now we're going back. Yes, Erwin.
Rabbi, I think I asked you this question, but I don't think you ever answered. In the Bible, most of the women have Leah, Rivka, Sarah, and all these wonderful ladies who we admire, had difficulty to get pregnant. All the other ones who have illicit relationships get pregnant bingo the first time. What is God thinking?
Well, in Tractate Bingo, so what I would say is the underlying assumption here is God is in control of conception. And so, so these stories are going to go the way God wants them to go. So it's no accident. By the way, Leah doesn't have any trouble conceiving. Just for
most of them. Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. Now the baby is dead. Somebody else want to read? No, you read.
Thereupon David
Go ahead,
rose
Len.
around. He bathed and anointed himself, and he changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and prostrated himself. Then he went home and asked for food, which they set before him, and he ate. His courtiers asked him, "Why have you acted in this manner? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you rise and take food." He replied, "When the child was still alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows, the Lord may have pity on me and the child may live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will never come back to me."
Okay, so I want to stop for a second. This is used by one of the proof texts for an afterlife from the
Yeah.
rabbis.
Yes.
It says,
Yes.
"I will go to him, but he won't come back to me."
Yeah.
So just want to note that. And the happy ending to the story.
David consoled his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and lay with her. She bore a son and named him Solomon. The Lord favored him, and he sent a message through the prophet Nathan, and he was named Jedediah in the instance of the Lord.
Okay, I just want to see what the next thing is. Okay.
Solomon was born- was
So,
named-
sorry, was there a question or comment?
It seems to me that the child had to die if they wanted the line to come from David.
Well,
Because,
David has a bunch of other sons, and if you read on in the story, you will read about scheming and killing and murder among his sons, and open rebellion where David has to flee for his life, and Bathsheba scheming to get Solomon to be David's heir. So David has other sons who are older sons and presumably more in line, but Bathsheba is going to really work hard to get Solomon to be David's successor. Erwin.
very good.
Rabbi, number one, the track 20, I believe that it is important to know that David anointed himself and he changed his clothes. I think the significance it is that to me, it means that he's gonna be a different man from now on, because God anointed him once, and he made all these.
Oh, it's a very interesting question. I want to look and see what the Hebrew is for anointing.
Only once you can be anointed.
Wer kommt David? It's yes. Yes.
No.
Yeah, I think it's the same root as like Mashiach.
Yeah.
I'm not sure actually.
So I think that's a significance, because
Yeah, I think I would not necessarily agree. I think the pshat of this is simply once the child dies, he stops mourning. You know, it's traditional to mourn, tear your garments, ashes, sackcloth and ashes, not shave, and so on. And he was actually doing this. He said, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, because who knows, the Lord may have pity on me, the child may live. But now that he's dead, you know, why should I fast? But I like your take, and it's and I wouldn't be at all surprised if the rabbis don't pick up on that again. So
You know, it also says that it's, in a sense, you can look at it and say it's all about David. When David wanted the child to get better, he fasted. But instead of mourning after the child dies, the child's gone now. What difference does it make? In a sense, it's all about David.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting in that he doesn't mourn at all. Now, in Jewish law, you don't mourn for a child less than 30 days old, because it was so common to have children die very early that if you went into actual traditional mourning for children less than 30 days old, the community would never be out of mourning. Okay, David, we have a problem, Houston, and the problem is a legal one. And the problem is Solomon. You might think, well, what's the problem with Solomon? David's married to Bathsheba. They have a baby, and the baby is Solomon. The problem is that according to Jewish law, and this is probably rabbinic, I have a feeling Jay will ask this question, not Torah, but I'm not 100% certain on this. If you commit adultery with someone, by definition, you're not married to her. You cannot marry her. You are prohibited from marrying someone with whom you have committed adultery. This actually arises, I don't know if it's a big issue in the Reform world, because I have to say it's probably pretty common. You have a
Our president did it.
yeah, actually several times, I think. Fortunately, he's not Jewish, but
his daughter is.
You have a couple of years. They're married to other people. They commit adultery. They get divorced, or a spouse dies, and they want to get married. They are actually prohibited from getting married, and if they get married, the child is a mamzer. So now the problem is, let's look at the genealogy. Here we have David and Bathsheba giving rise to Solomon, and we know that the Messiah is from the line of David. The problem is Solomon's a mamzer. Okay, that's a big problem. Now, Beth, you figured out the Moabites. This is really legal, technical, and when I explain it, I think you're all going to be angry. So I don't know if you've heard how the rabbis get David off the hook.
How do they?
Well, I will explain. I'm just giving Beth a chance to see if she's studied this text. No, okay. So, Larry, you're going to like this because it's very legal, or you're going to hate this. So there is something called, in rabbinic law, a conditional get. A get is a divorce, right? Everybody knows this. A get is a Jewish divorce. And it was actually fairly common and used in the following way. In the old days, if a woman's husband went off to war and got killed, in order for her to be legally free of him and recognized as a widow, there would have to be 2 witnesses to his death that could come back and testify. Okay? And in a lot of these wars, nobody came back, or you wouldn't necessarily have a witness to a particular death. So therefore, it was actually common when a soldier would go off to war, he would give his wife a conditional get. And the get would read, if I'm not back, by March 31st, 2000, well, let's make it April 15th, 2020, and I'm physically with you, the way this get reads, then we are divorced. And then there's 2 different ways to write the conditional get. Depending on how it's written, you can either be divorced effective on April 15th, when you don't come back, or if it's written a different way, you can be divorced effective the date you write the get. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
So the rabbis say, of course Uriah wrote a conditional get to his wife and wrote it in a way that they would be divorced effective the date he wrote the get. And did Uriah ever physically be with his wife after that?
No.
No. So technically, they were divorced effective the date Uriah went out to war, and there was never any adultery.
What?
And the rabbis have seen the certification of that conditional get, right?
They don't need to. It's obvious. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
a question.
That's really how they get David off the hook and Solomon off the hook.
All right, I have a question. If Uriah had a brother, which probably he had one, then the brother's responsibility is to marry Bathsheba.
I would agree with that, but by the time all this gets out, Bathsheba's pregnant and David's wife. And I don't know if Uriah has a brother. The Bible isn't interested in that part of the story.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
my Josh.
Okay, so now we are going to go to a section of the Bible that's not in our Bible. It's New Testament. And this is a genealogy of Jesus. It's actually the opening verses of the New Testament from the book of Matthew. And one of my teachers pointed out that this clearly is a Jewish genealogy. Matthew actually wrote for Jews. Matthew was Jewish. And so he is writing what is certainly well known as a Jewish genealogy. And of course, they're going to get down to Mary and Jesus, right? But, you know, these are all Jews. What I want to point out, and you can glance through this, we're starting with Abraham, father of Isaac, Isaac, father of Jacob, Jacob, father of Judah, Judah, father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar. And we go through a bunch of other people, no women. The next woman mentioned is Rahab, who's a prostitute. Okay? Boaz, mother. And Boaz is the father of Obed by Ruth. So Ruth is a woman that's mentioned in the genealogy. And then, I think to underline the point, and I love pointing this out to particularly Christian pastors, because they don't see it. They never saw this. I mean, they've seen the genealogy, but they don't see the point that the only women here are these bizarre relationships. It says David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. They don't even say Bathsheba, as if to underline the point. And then, of course, we have a woman, Mary, at the end, and we're not going to discuss whether Joseph is really the father of Jesus. That's not our problem. Okay, so the interesting thing about this genealogy, which opens the New Testament, is the only women mentioned are these strange unions, shall we say.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here's the overall genealogy, just to see it once more. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. Abraham is the uncle of Lot. Lot has sex with his daughters and has 2 children, Ammon and Moab. Neither one should be ever admitted into the Israelite clan. Judah has a baby with his daughter-in-law. We get down to Solomon, and in Matthew, we see Solomon had a child with Rahab, who is a prostitute, mother of Boaz. Boaz has a child with Ruth, who is a Moabite, and we get down to David and Bathsheba, and they have Solomon, and then actually Naamah, which is one of Solomon's wives, is an Ammonite, and we get to the Messiah. So it's a pretty interesting genealogy here. So here are the questions for discussion. Let me see if I can minimize this so I can see you while we discuss it. What do you think is going on? Why the strange couplings? Why does the New Testament genealogy only mention these women? Is there a lesson here? And how does this lesson apply to us today? Okay, good. That is the last item. I'm going to stop sharing. But basically, I just want to get your reaction to this story, and why is it in the Bible? Presumably, it's in the Bible for a reason, unless you think it's just happenstance. You know, the genealogy in the New Testament makes it clear that they're underlining the point that we have all of these bizarre relationships.
Can I explain one thing to Erwin, please?
Yes, you can try.
Erwin, earlier you questioned why Bathsheba was on the roof. They did not have indoor plumbing.
Oh.
So the bathtub had to be on the roof.
Yeah, I would say not necessarily, because you could have a room and have,
Yes.
you know, you could have a bathtub and hot water heating on a stove, and
mixes weren't necessarily on a roof.
Yeah, mixers were in the ground. That's a good point.
They were in the ground.
Yeah.
Well, mixers have to have running water. Can't
Mikvahs have to have living water, not running water.
have to have what water?
Living water, mayim chaim.
Oh,
So you have to have, if you go to a
Drink water.
mikvah today, you
Drink
have to have some water in the mikvah that fell to the earth either by rain or through a stream. And there's other interesting rules, like you can't convey it by a metal container or a pipe. So in fact, what they actually do is they have a little area in a mikvah. You step into a rather large pool, and there's a smaller pool. And the way in that smaller pool, they put a block of ice that has been shipped from somewhere where it fell naturally, or was created naturally, or even frozen from a natural source. And they put that on the other side. And when you step into the mikvah, you open little plugs so the waters mingle. But it's definitely indoors. But anyway, you know. Okay.
I think that the reason all these women appear in the Bible because God believes in forgiveness, and from all, because they were, so to speak, think that they behaved bad, that something good can come from it.
By the way, I don't think, we could talk about Lot's daughters. I don't think any of the women behaved badly. So let's think about it. Lot's daughters, you can argue that was a mistake, but they were trying to say,
Boaz's wife, who was a prostitute, pretended to be a prostitute.
How do you pretend to be a prostitute?
No, but you said on the picture, but she dressed.
Oh no, that was Tamar's.
Tamar.
Judah's wife. Judah's wife pretended to be a prostitute, but she was actually holding Judah to the law, and Judah says she's more righteous than I am.
Yeah.
So okay, so she doesn't do anything wrong.
So maybe these women are righteous. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think they do anything wrong. Ruth doesn't do anything wrong. No. You could argue Bathsheba, by going to David, does something wrong, but it's not clear she had the power to refuse him.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting idea. Go ahead.
I was wondering about David, and I don't remember what comes before that, but you said star was rising and so forth. And I was wondering whether one of the purposes is to show us that these people that look so marvelous and perfect, they have faults and downfalls too.
Okay, so, and who is coming from David?
Solomon.
And who down the road, Rabbi Yamenu, to be brought by Elijah someday soon, we hope, will come from the line of David.
The Messiah.
Right. So just to wrap it up, my take on this is the Messiah is going to come from a family as crazy and meshuggah as yours and mine. And I love this. I love this because in Judaism, we don't have this idea that redemption needs somebody perfect. I mean, in Christianity, Jesus presumably is perfect. Not only doesn't he sin, he's even born without original sin, which for us is not a problem in the first place, but for Christians it's a big problem. But somehow there's something called the Immaculate Conception, which actually results in the birth of Mary. Mary is conceived by her parents in a way that doesn't convey original sin to her, so Jesus is not affected by original sin. And we're waiting for a perfect, ideal Redeemer. I love the idea that in Judaism, the Messiah, the Redeemer, is going to come from, among other things, some really pretty crazy, messed up families. Now, I'm sure none of you have people in your family anywhere near as crazy as this story, but actually I know some of you, so and I certainly know my family. So to me, that's the underlying message in this whole connected story, and the coup de grace. I mean, the proof text is the New Testament, because they only list. They could have listed Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and so on, and all the other women in the genealogies, but the only women they list are these rather bizarre connections.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I like your explanation very much,
Thank you.
because I think Kabbalistic explanations tells me that Mashiach comes from the person who achieved the highest level of spirituality.
And how do you connect that to this story? I don't.
I can't. That's, well, you know, it's two group of thoughts. You said that you know, Messiah can come from the craziest situation and family, and the Kabbalist says no. The Messiah gonna come from the person who achieved the highest level.
Yeah, I don't know if Kabbalah says that. One of the things I hear from the Kabbalists all the time is that if we live our lives perfectly, then our generation will merit the coming of the Messiah. But I've never heard, and it may exist, I just don't recall hearing it, you know, who the Messiah's parents will be, whether it will be a tzaddik.
They don't say anything about that.
Yeah, so I haven't heard.
So,
Okay,
so
any other?
If any of us here can achieve the highest level of spirituality, we could be the Messiah.
We'll let
From
you
your
know.
lips to God's ear, and we'll see if coronavirus disappears.
Jay think I'm crazy.
Yes, I do. I love you anyhow.
Well, the good news is there's a lot of it going around.
Yeah, and
But also, I mean, there's a lot of King David stories. David is my favorite character in the Bible because he's so human. I mean, you know, he's a great warrior, kills Goliath. He goes out and fights. He plays, you know, the lute. He's a musician. He writes the Psalms according to Jewish tradition. He's a poet. He's a singer, and he's very human. He commits adultery. He murders. You know, if there is ever a human character in the Bible, I think David is the most human, and that's why I actually think there's good reason to believe this story or something damn close to it happened, because no one would ever dream that one up and put it in the Bible.
Is there a story there when the temple was built, God forbid him to open the door of the temple?
No, God forbade David from building the temple.
Building the temple.
And that's actually in Chronicles, that because David was a man of war and only a man of peace, give the temple, and Solomon, the Hebrew for Solomon is Shlomo, his peace. So I want to thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
I am
you.
going to cut off the